All right, now recording. So, two housekeeping issues before we get to the lesson today. So, number one, because I am a relatively recent hire into the Ontario college system, there is a program that they drag us all kicking and screaming through called the College Education Development Program or something like that. Long story short, there's going to be a guy come in to observe my teaching style. He's also a new hire. We're supposed to be buddied up in this sort of very natural but also contractually obligated and contractually contained relationship. But anyway, he's actually quite a nice guy. He's a professor who teaches economics and accounting and that sort of thing in the business faculty. He has absolutely no idea what any of this is, but he's here primarily. He's going to be here primarily to, see how I teach, sort of thing. So that's going to be happening, I think. I forget if he's showing up this week or next week, but he'll be here at 10, I think, either today or in a week from now. So.
Are you saying we have to behave?
No, absolutely not. In fact, it would even be better if you misbehaved a little, because then I could demonstrate how I deal with misbehaving students.
So you want to use this as a guinea pig?
No, it's okay. Just be your own natural selves. Everything will work out. The problem, it's this is an interesting class to go observe because it's very small and we all know each other reasonably well after the trials and fires of first semester. So it's interesting because it's if I were to pick a class as this is a normal class where I will be behaving more normally. This is not the one I would pick, but this is the one that he wanted to see and works with the schedule, etc., etc. So, oh no, he's coming next week because he's going to be here for PHP. I remember that now. We're doing PHP next week. Yes.
So he's going to be observing all of the teachers, or just you because you are a new hire?
He does me, I do him. We're buddies.
Okay.
We're contractually obligated friends. So,
I have a question.
Yeah.
If we want to ask the administrator to observe one teacher, can we do that?
Certainly.
We can ask them to do that if we are not satisfied with the professor how he teach or something like that. Can we ask them to do that?
Absolutely. So.
It's not you.
No, okay, good. Oh, I thought, hey, I passed y'all last semester. Come on, what do you got? No. Yeah, so if you wish to engage in the department's quality control mechanisms, let me lay some of that in, some information on you so that you can do so intelligently and in a way that will be most likely to. Yeah, I know it's rolling. I know it's rolling. This is how to do so intelligently in such a manner that a good outcome is most likely. So, first of all, the person to whom you would direct these complaints is the associate dean of the department. You can look it up on the website. I don't want to say your email on the camera, but you can talk to me after class about that. She's leaving within a month, though. You may or may not have heard, but she's actually been picked up for a better position at a different institution. So there will be another guy coming in on an interim basis. And in that sort of sense, the normal mechanisms are currently in a state of disruption. So, you know, I don't know whether that will completely scuttle a complaint or not, but just be aware that that's what's going on. And if you fire a complaint off at, you know, a person who's got like 2 or 3 weeks left in their position,
They might not be taking it seriously, yes.
it's entirely probable that they're going to be just like, well, I'll just, you know, that. If it was me, I'd say, well, that could be the next person's problem. You know, our current AD is very on top of these sorts of things, so I don't know how things would go, but if you're going to get it in quickly, basically, before the big switch. You know, that's just kind of the natural order of how things work in these sorts of institutions. The other thing is as much as it may be tempting to sort of go into more rumor mill type material when formulating a complaint letter, it is much more persuasive to the administration if you stick closer to the sort of observable and provable facts, if that makes sense. In like things that in particular administration tends to pay attention to because they're kind of like regulatory requirements and that sort of thing. Not meeting all of your contact hours, that's the term we use for in-class time, right? In the past, action has been taken against professors who, for example, teach for 1 hour out of a 3-hour class that's been scheduled, right? It's like, oh, I got through the material, you know, we can go, sort of thing. That is strongly frowned upon. Without, you know, naming any names or anything, you know, because libel. What's sort of the nature of the complaint that you have? Like, what are the particular things you don't like?
So the things that it's like what material is being taught us, it's totally like the way it should be. It's different, like, you know, the labs and also the material is totally different based on the lecture that we do. So it's kind of like, you know.
So that's
what I feel.
That may or may not be the responsibility of the individual instructor. So the way that courses are administered, you have basically a person called a course writer. The course writer is responsible for setting the curriculum. Now, an individual instructor has a fair amount of leeway and freedom for the way in which those materials are taught, the way the material is presented, even the sorts of topics that are covered. Like, for example, when I'm teaching in this classroom, you know, you may have noticed I have a tendency to go off on tangents sometimes. I always feel like the tangent I'm going on is relevant to the material. It's like an additional topic that I'd like to present to you guys. Occasionally, I'm just having one for fun, but, you know, hopefully the fun ones are actually fun, and not, you know. But anyway, so like there is a fair amount of leeway for an instructor to go off script, if that makes sense. However, if the script itself is the thing that's bad, in your opinion, basically if the person instructing is the course writer, then that is also their responsibility. But if the instructor is not the course writer, then your complaint is against someone other than your professor.
And also, like, you know, when I ask questions, the explanation doesn't make any sense, like, you know, about, like, in the past what happened, like, there were questions that I asked particularly, they gave me an answer which ended up wrong.
Oh,
And I lost marks because of that.
oof.
So it's kind of like, it's doesn't make any sense, like, so it happened in the past and it's going on again, so I feel like, it's something like that.
Well, I would advise caution. It's very difficult to be anonymous in a class of this size,
I know.
So, normally these sorts of complaints, should be anonymized so that there's no, repercussion. Not that I'm saying that this particular professor would be prone to repercussions or anything like that. But on this type of thing, the line that usually comes down from the administration is something like, well, did you talk to the professor about this? Right? So the way that the academic team works is just a smidge like a military works.
Yeah.
Like you're expected, and students don't realize this, but this is the standard that they're generally held to. You're expected to respect the chain of command, which means you try to resolve your issue at the lowest level possible and only move up the chain when resolution is impossible at that particular level. So if you go with a complaint to the associate dean that this professor gives me the wrong answer when I ask a question in class, basically the immediate line you're going to get back is, well, did you talk to this professor about the issue? And if you haven't done that, they're not going to listen to anything you have to say, basically, especially about stuff like this, because it's not really like there's some stuff. It's like if it's obvious that the professor is like punitive and is meeting very few of their contractual obligations, and like especially if it's like a contractual issue, like how many hours of class are you actually receiving versus what you're paying for, type thing. That's something where you can feasibly kind of jump above the person with whom you have a complaint, because like it's reasonable to expect that nothing you say to them is going to improve that situation. But like with something like this, definitely the expectation would be that you would talk to this person directly first. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Have I clarified the system?
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's recorded, right?
Oh yeah, of course. Well, I haven't said anything that isn't true,
Yeah.
and I haven't even been my usual cynical self for all of that. I was speaking seriously and sincerely. So, and it really is in the best interest of the department that when students have issues with professors, that those issues be raised, be actually raised. And it's not, sweeping things under the rug doesn't do any good for anybody. That being said, there is a process, and if you have some reasonable expectation of something you would recognize as, well, we got something, there are a bunch of these sort of Byzantine rules that you don't have any idea about, that are basically embedded in departmental structure and culture that, you're not aware of as a student, so that's part of my duty is to tell you. But yeah, I think that's all correct. I would say if you can get more than one signatory on a letter, that also helps support the case. Now, because like, if you can get like the entire class to sign a letter, even if it's 4 people, but also make sure that whatever letter you're writing, it is succinct and well written and not wasting the AD's time with a bunch of like side issues. Like keep to the point, keep it brief, and focus on the concerns themselves, basically. Because it shouldn't may happen maybe, but it is kind of just a general human thing that how well written the letter is the person reading it reflects that onto your own the writer's intelligence, which may or may not be true, but it's nevertheless the way humans operate. So anyway.
Thank you.
Good. So that was housekeeping item number 1 and surprise housekeeping item number 2. I had a third housekeeping item, and I know it's getting rather into the class, but hey, it's a 4-hour class. We're here for a while anyways, I suppose. So some of you may remember that my wife is currently pregnant, and I just wanted to give you a heads up that I don't know how the end of the semester is going to go. The due date, right? The due date is May 10th, which should put us in the clear. That's sufficiently far after exam week that there shouldn't be any unexpected babies during exam week. That being said, with babies, you never know, right? So I just wanted to put you on blast that basically the plan I have with the department is to see out the rest of the semester, regardless what happens with the baby, right? But if the baby is born on exam day, I can't be here, right? I have to be with her and my new son. So just letting you know, it's an unlikely scenario, maybe a 1 to 2% chance, but it's there. Okay?
So based on like previous experiences you have, you might know like she's expecting to have a baby early or?
Both of the previous ones have been early.
Okay.
One by 2 weeks, the other by 1 week.
Okay.
Now, the first was 2 weeks and the second was 1 week. So if that's a trend or trajectory, it's likely the kid will be born very early May, which poses no problem for all of us. That being said, again, you never know with these things. So, basically, this being our third child, I'm completely and utterly done with the trying to predict when the baby's going to be born lottery. It's like that's up to the baby. I have no input. I get no say. Any prediction I make is going to be wrong. So there you go. Burned twice already. So twice bitten, third time shy. Anyway, so shall we actually learn some stuff now?
Yes.
Beauty. So, so we're going to talk about JQuery. JQuery is a framework. The purpose of a framework is to make your life easier. The price that you have to pay is learning some new, slightly different syntax from what we've studied so far. Once you've learned the JQuery syntax, it's actually faster and easier to program with this than to program in what's called vanilla JavaScript. So far, we have learned vanilla JavaScript. JQuery is butterscotch ripple or some kind of other flavor. So, JavaScript can be extended with libraries and frameworks that make common tasks easier. So, it's important to understand we are still programming with JavaScript. What jQuery does is it allows a different sort of syntax that are basically a bunch of abbreviations of some of the longer operations that were taking multiple lines and many characters per line in the JavaScript we were doing last week. But fundamentally, this is still JavaScript. You can still default back to your vanilla JavaScript and everything you know about it. The code gets embedded in a web page in the exact same manner. All this is some optional syntax rules that make things a bit easier in certain respects. Does this make any sense? So far, so good? So, the design goals of this and other frameworks is to shorten development time, mostly by collecting up a bunch of often repeated operations, basically the same kind of abstraction that you would have with functions, right? You take some common operations, package them together, give them a shortened syntax, you can use them, everything's cool. That's the idea. Further, by making code shorter, you make it easier to understand. A big asterisk on the end there most of the time. Human beings kind of have a limited amount of text they can hold in their brain at any one given time. This is reflected actually in you know the Flesch-Kincaid reading levels for written text. If you go on Word, you can get your document analyzed in terms of like word count and also reading level. Well, there's a formula that goes into it, but essentially it's a bunch of statistics which are performed on number of words in a sentence, number of syllables in a word, and number of sentences in a paragraph or something like that. Basically, the more words there are in a sentence, the more the grade level increases. And that's also true with the number of syllables, average number of syllables per word. The claim of Flesch-Kincaid is that they map to grade levels, as in, somebody who's reading at a grade 6 level can decode sentences that are so long with words that are so many syllables on average, right? If you take a look at your standard newspaper article, I know newspapers kind of almost don't even exist anymore, but if you take a newspaper article, the reading level of those is around grade 6 to 8. And if you take something like written in the olden times, like the Magna Carta, it's got a reading level of 30, which in theory means that you should not be able to decode that text completely without 30 years of formal education, which is, I would say around as much as I probably got by the end of it, but probably not quite that much. Because I took way too long to do a PhD, that's the reason. But yeah, so to read the Magna Carta is very difficult because it's very long and the words are long, and in the olden times they kind of they had no rules about the run-on sentence. So there's this one page out of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, which is an entire page which is one sentence broken by semicolons. It's pretty impressive. But anyway, the shorter things are, the easier they are to understand most of the time, unless you're losing important details, right? So the point of these frameworks is to make code easier to read and understand at the same time. They can also help us with cross-browser compatibility, Although this is, you know, not so much an issue as it used to be, as most things are based on the big three. They're either the big three themselves, or they're, you know, they're sort of derived from their code base. But here's a fun game. How many browsers can everybody name? Just to underscore the point of browser compatibility. How many browsers can you name?
Google.
Google is not a browser. Chrome is the browser made by Google. Chrome. What next?
Edge. Microsoft Edge.
Microsoft Edge.
Firewall or something like
Firefox.
that? Firefox, okay.
Yes, Mozilla Firefox. Believe it or not, Microsoft Explorer
Yeah.
technically is a different browser than Edge, even though it replaced it. And like they basically deprecated Explorer at this point, but some people still run it, if you can believe that, much to Microsoft's consternation.
Safari.
Safari, yep. Mac Standard. Netscape, not supported anymore, but we'll put them on the list. There's way more than
Yeah,
one more.
there's one more that I know, but I. Yahoo maybe? No,
Does Yahoo have a browser?
I think so.
No.
There's just sites. Remember?
Yahoo is just a corporate site.
Yeah, it's a site.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not
They do have one. There you go. Yeah.
Thank you.
There we go. Thank you. Anybody else? You're actually missing my personal favorite, which I'm going to have to plug at this point.
There's Opera, there's Brave.
Yes.
There's,
You just looked up a list. Defeats the whole purpose. But yeah, Opera. Opera is actually, like, that's a pretty decent browser, actually. It's kind of, like, interestingly, like, laid out. Reasonable. Opera is a reasonable browser. I would say that aside from the sort of Microsoft, Mozilla, and like, these are all your big guys, right? Aside from the big guys, Opera is like one of your more popular small browsers. Brave, that is the one that I use. So this is what Brave is, right? They took Chrome, they took out all of the tracking and all of the like gunk that Google puts in there to construct its profile on you and all of that kind of stuff, and removed like a lot. Like, it's got very good built-in third-party, like cross-party, third-party cookie protection, and lots and lots and lots of stuff like that. It's like, it's privacy focused. It also has, it's also like, it's got quite a good ad blocker on it. So most of these other browsers, like, you know, for example, Firefox, you can download an ad blocking extension, right? But you know how, and you know, it'll be interesting putting this up on YouTube because I'm about to tell you how to get around YouTube. But you know how YouTube has been like detecting whether you've got an ad blocker recently? It's like, you've got 3 more videos and then we're shutting you down. That type of thing, right? Well, don't be fooled. That's a constant cat and mouse game, right? Basically, that's only true until the people who write the ad blocker like get around whatever particular method Google's trying to use to detect them this time. get Brave, keep it updated, and you'll never have that problem. It's got built-in YouTube ad blocking, and I use it, and it's glorious. It has worked despite the crackdown. Many of these other like browser extensions for ad blocking have not been, like, they've been falling away because they're not updated frequently enough to keep up with YouTube. But basically, that's because all the good developers went and are developing for Brave right now, and they are these fellows are fighting the good fight. They are keeping my music that I listen to on YouTube ad-free, which is marvelous and glorious. And if you're not using an ad blocker on YouTube, you should be, because, you know, basically advertising on the internet is like kind of evil in its essence. So really, you're fighting for truth and goodness and right by blocking ads. That's my position. And I don't even care that if you're blocking ads on my channel. Block ads on my channel, just like everybody else's. So yeah. There are a huge number of other smaller browsers as well, in addition to all of these. You know, we don't have time to go into them all, but the browser is actually something you can pick out from your HTTP tags. But anyway, so cross-browser compatibility, you might not be, like, while, like, I think the Chromium base is something like, you know, 60 or 70% of all internet traffic these days. Like, you can't be guaranteed that everybody's using Chrome, right? It's not how the landscape works. So, let's talk about jQuery specifically now. So jQuery was released in 2006 by John Reisig. It is primarily a document object model manipulation library. That is to say, it allows us to find, select, manipulate elements of the HTML page with compact CSS style syntax. It allows us to chain actions together, and it allows us to easily add event handlers, and we can use it to perform AJAX queries. AJAX is something that we will be talking about. That's going to be a major topic in a couple of weeks. So week 6, we're talking about AJAX. Week 5, we're talking about PHP. And I simply must get you off on the server before then. So, yeah. So, roughly speaking, rough overview. PHP is a server-side language. In order to program with PHP, you must be doing so in a server environment. That's very, very different from the client. AJAX, we are popping back into JavaScript. What AJAX basically is it's the way to make JavaScript talk to the server. So it enables client-server communication aside from page loads. So that's, and then MySQL is databasing language. The question is, once you have accessed the server, what do you find on it? Answer, it's usually stored in a database. But anyway, so jQuery. Isn't jQuery old? 2006, that's nearly 20 years ago now. And if you know anything about computers and the pace of rate of change of internet technologies, something that's 3 years old is considered old. So, basically, a lot of So jQuery is a library to improve JavaScript. JavaScript itself has seen a fair amount of improvement over the last, 20 years. 20 years ago, it was a miserable language to program in. It's now significantly easier as they have been continuously improving the language. Some things are now easier to do in vanilla JavaScript as opposed to jQuery, such as Ajax. But, so you might be saying, jQuery is like a big cookie and the mice are nibbling around the edge of it. And eventually they're going to eat the whole thing. But, another problem with jQuery, this model that we've shown where we're using JavaScript to modify elements of the HTML page, this is kind of an old way of thinking about web design in general. We are increasingly, that's not the way things are typically being done anymore, sort of, in quotes. Normally, these days, things move kind of more towards the server generates the page that the client wants, more dynamically kind of model. But there will always be a place for DOM manipulation. That will never go away, right? So jQuery is still the most used front-end library, and it is actually still increasing in popularity, despite the fact everybody thinks it's old and broken, and they actually removed jQuery from the client-side course in the 559 program recently. But it's still useful. If you compare jQuery to one of the sort of up-and-coming client-side frameworks that has been one of those mice eating around the cookie, React.js, pardon me, jQuery is currently on 70 million websites and trends up. React is only on 500,000, despite the fact that everybody is falling over themselves to, heap praise on React in every possible way. Is it possible that in the future, React will overtake jQuery, jQuery will lose market share and eventually become relegated to the dustbin of history? Possibly, but I've probably talked about this before in class, but there's this interesting principle with software where software languages and libraries never really die, and the reason for this is there is always a need to maintain legacy code. Believe it or not, okay, so banks, right? Banks got into computers fairly early, right? In the 70s, 60s, 70s, banks were like, well, computers have obvious application in this particular field. Let's do some programming, guys. Let's buy some mainframes. We've got money. We're a bank. So they did. And a lot of their code base was written in a language that was highly popular at the time called COBOL. You're nodding your head, yes?
Because no one knows how to use it anymore.
Yeah. COBOL. Common business-oriented language, right? This is what COBOL looks like. There you go. So basically, the whole point of COBOL is that it mainly uses real English words instead of programming language constructs. It's written to read like a sentence, which is, in my opinion, actually a really bad programming trap. If you're like I get, I teach students, and I teach people who are just learning to code, who think that they can form an English sentence, write it in code, and it'll work, right? And they're like substituting like English words in and out for like what should be mathematical constructs, and I'm like, you got a long way to go, basically. You might eventually be a programmer, but this is not a reassuring start. So you can see that this is like quite different from the sorts of the sorts of languages we've been learning in class so far. With these older languages, you kind of have to be well aware of the subtleties of them as well. Like, it's quite tricky programming in a language like this. But anyway, this thing is archaic, right? In programming languages, studying this language would be the equivalent of studying like Sanskrit or ancient Greek or Sumerian cuneiform or something like that, right? Like, that's how old this is. Yet, Fanshawe College has a course on this. Why? There's still industry demand for people who know how to program COBOL. Why? To maintain existing code bases. Nobody writes new programs in COBOL, right?
It's still inconsistent.
It's still, like, here's the problem, right? You are a company. Software products have bugs and are prone to needing maintenance, right? You need to maintain code. Once code is written, it must be maintained, right? In order to maintain the code, somebody has to know the language it's written in. Even if there's nothing actively or currently wrong with a program, if you are a bank, you must have a certain number of COBOL programmers kicking around in case something goes wrong, and things do go wrong, right? So, the other thing is, it's very often the case, and this is the deep, deep, deep reason, right? A lot of people don't even know how these programs work anymore, right? So you can't really replace them. In order to write a program to replace an existing program, you must fully understand how that program works. These programs, which run a surprising amount of like the back end of bank servers and that sort of thing, were written by people who are dead now, right? Dead or very, very retired. I won't say dead or senile, but basically, like if you were a programmer, so let's say you were one of these ace programmers in your 20s in the 1970s. How old would you be now?
90. Oh, 70, you said?
Yeah, in the 70s.
So 50 something.
Well, it's 50 years later now, so you would be in your 70s, deep into retirement.
Oh, yeah, because you were already grown up, right? So 70s or 80s.
Yeah, and that's assuming that you were like in your mid-20s when you were working on this stuff, which is probable because that's the sort of people who wrote code back then. Yeah, imagine wanting to imagine the bank calling you up, being like, oh yeah, hey, Mr. Programmer, would you like to come out of retirement to maintain our busted code base that you wrote back in the 70s? And you say to them, you've had 50 years to replace me? 50 years? No, I'm going to retire to my private island, and that'll be the end of it. So,
I used it.
Yeah, you used the
thesis, it's called TS2 something.
TS2
Yeah.
programming language?
No, it's not a program. It's a basically application that is being run through that. I think so. TSYS, TSYS.
TSYS?
Yeah.
This thing?
Yeah. It's a payment solution.
Yeah.
But I think it's used this programming language. I think so.
Well, yeah, probably. Everybody says like, ooh, cloud, ooh. Like, you know, basically the problem is, you know, software projects are tricky and often fail. I don't know if this is still the case, but the statistic in my head is that half of all software projects, enterprise projects that are engaged in by industries fail. It's very easy to tell a failed software project when you see one. And you know, once a project has failed, particularly if they're a public entity rather than a private entity, the tendency is to keep the thing limping along and try to patch it into working order over the course of like many years with many millions of dollars invested, right? I can think of a couple of good examples of this. You know the Phoenix Pay system that the government uses? That is a failed software project. At McMaster University, where I used to teach, there was a particularly nice example of a failed software project. It was called Mosaic. It was the replacement for an in-house solution they built. Basically, it's like, that's how students pay for tuition and that sort of thing. Somewhat similar to My Canvas. But basically, they purchased a software package that, you know, University of Waterloo was using as well. They got, you know, they thought because they were buying a software package, they didn't need anybody with any expertise to put it together, so it was literally put together over a summer by like 2 or 3 summer students. And that, like, within the first 2 years, that software cost them $65 million. Which, let me tell you, if you wanted to bake your own in-house solution from scratch, hiring senior software engineers, it would not cost $65 million. Nevertheless, so there's a great deal of business risk in redeveloping code that exists and works. It's far and away, most of the time, the cheapest option to keep that old busty code ticking over from one year to the next without actually replacing it. It's like in broader society, how often does a bridge get replaced? Right? They fix them up, but they don't, they only replace them if they fall over, right? Same kind of idea. Anyway, that's COBOL for you. COBOL is a good example of one of those. So anyway, JQuery, I'm not saying jQuery is COBOL, but like that same principle drives a lot of the sort of holdover languages, if that makes sense.
So when was the React.js was introduced?
Oh, that's a good question, actually. It's relatively recently, I think within the last 5 or 6 years. Ah, 2013. See, these things tend to have like an exponential growth. So like something will be around for like 5 years before anybody realizes it exists and it's good, and then it sort of takes off in popularity. That's kind of where React was. Also, it takes time to make it good enough to compete in the market. But React is made by Facebook.
So it's kind of take over the jQuery faster than anything else because this is what is the trend going on right now.
Well, just because it's got money behind it, it's still, like, to be adopted by the community, it has to actually be better than existing solutions. And you can throw as much money at something as you want, but it doesn't, like, unless you've got the talent, right? Now, you know, I'm not going to say Facebook doesn't have talent. Facebook has many very talented programmers, but it, like, you know, it's a particular thing that you're trying to do, developing a library like this. But anyway, so yeah, and also you shouldn't call them Meta because they stole the name. there's an actual lawsuit over it, but they were just like kind of steamrolling through and like, well, if we just call ourselves Meta, then this company that's suing us is gonna like, you know, yeah. But yeah, there was actually already a company involved in computing called Meta, and they just stole the name from it. So you should call them Facebook, because that's what they are. And anyway.
But it says they paid $60 million to acquire the exclusive right to its new name.
Did they? They paid it? They paid them off, did they?
I think so, that's what it says.
Well, I'd be interested to see, yeah. I'd be interested in doing more research. Anyway, so, percentage usage of jQuery is still going up. You know, this is over a period from 2000 to 2021, so it's a bit old, but you can see that in general, jQuery and Bootstrap are acquiring more and more market share. So, having talked around jQuery for some time, let's actually talk about jQuery. How does one get it? You can download jQuery from a website like jQuery.com or another source like Google. We will get a file called jQuery well, we'll probably use slightly more updated numbers than this. We then need to include that script in our page using the usual methods. And we will then, you can also get jQuery from somewhere hosted online. This is, you remember where we integrated Bootstrap? This is like that, the CDN approach. In this case, ajax.googleapps.com hosts this software, and you can load it dynamically. So, the advantage of doing so is that you basically don't have to worry about keeping it up to date. They will update it here, and you always get the latest updates. The disadvantage is updates can occasionally break your code, so you don't necessarily want to have the customers using code that you haven't tested, right? And if you download the source code to your server, if communication with this server becomes interrupted, they only have to access yours, which sometimes things go down. You guys remember that where Teams went down last week? That was funny. I thought that was hilarious. Mostly because I have an animus against Microsoft, but also just the language that they were using. It was like they were talking about Teams as if it was an organism. And it was so interesting because it exposed all of this like strange language that they use to like risk mitigation, and like they called it a fallover process. Like features were being dropped, and they called it a fallover process because their servers had, I don't even know what the source of the problem was, but it must have been pretty big to cause it, because it was pretty much everywhere at once. And it's like, these people speak this weird, strange, esoteric language. It's like they really are wizards in a tower, you know? But anyway, so I'm going to leave off the downloading of that code until we see a little bit of what jQuery actually looks like. So, jQuery works with selectors and actions. The selector is basically your CSS selector, right, that allows us to grab DOM elements. The action is one of a series of pre-baked function names which perform particular actions on the selected element. So, for example, p.hide takes everything collected up by the p tag and makes it invisible on the on the web page. So by the time we get to PHP, you're gonna hate dollar signs, but dollar sign is the JQuery function. When you see a dollar sign, that means this is JQuery. Proceed accordingly. When you want to start a JQuery thing, you put the dollar sign in. You write your selector. Ooh, the end of it came right off in that case. Interesting. You write your selector, and then you specify which action you want to take. The reason I say that you'll be sick of dollar signs by the time we're through PHP is that in PHP, all variables are preceded by the dollar sign. All of them at all times. Hurrah! But that's next week. So, selectors select elements to perform the action on. The action is some function that you perform on the elements. So, .myClass.hide hides all elements with the class myClass. Now, this is still easier than JavaScript, even if you ignore the contracted syntax. This bit is essentially equivalent to documents.querySelectAll, right? Most of the time we've been using querySelect, not querySelectAll. QuerySelectAll in vanilla JavaScript returns an array of the selected elements, right? Once you have that, you have to manipulate it the same way you would an array in C#, right? You've got to set up your for loop from, val I, or let I equal 0, I is less than array.length, etc., etc. You got to do all of that legwork in order to loop over those elements and do something to them, right? In this case, jQuery actions automatically apply to all selected elements. So you get to skip the loop. It just does it for all of them. It's doing the same thing in the background, but you as the developer don't have to look at it. Does this make sense? Okay. So, selectors, again, follow CSS syntax. Hiding it for a moment. Okay. CSS syntax review. How do you select something by ID? What's the character? There's one character that you start a CSS selector when you're going for an identifier or an ID. What is it?
Is the diff dot?
Nope. It appears on old telephone.
Is the number sign?
It's the pound sign, yep. How about a class? How do you get a class?
Dot.
Class is dot. How do you get an element? Yes, you just say the element. So, same is true here in jQuery. The octofork / hashtag / pound sign / number sign / sharp symbol, that gets you some selected ID.
Similar to
Yeah, basically the exact same as in CSS. And that's the idea, like that's the design intent. Basically, when CSS came along, people were like, hey, that's a fantastic way of like grabbing things out of the DOM. Let's use that for everything now. And that now they use it for basically everything. Grabbing a class, you use the period, and grabbing something without the hashtag or the dot selects tags, in this case, tables. It would be interesting to know if this was extensible to pseudo classes, but that's okay. We won't worry about this for now. It probably is. It is possible to add event handlers to elements using jQuery in a very fun and intuitive way. So far, we have been doing this by adding an on-click or adding some kind of attribute to the HTTP element itself. But that approach requires you to come in from the HTML side and specify a JavaScript function. It is also useful to be able to assign these event handlers from the JavaScript side. So, you know, for example, if I wanted to rickroll everybody at once, I could say paragraph.click and then make this a thing that takes them to the rickroll that's to that video, that YouTube video, right? So if you're making an event handler, you provide one of two things. Either a function name, you define a function somewhere else, you use the name. This is my recommended method. Or you can also define a quote-unquote anonymous function. Anonymous functions are not something we've talked about yet, but basically, if you take all of the function syntax but leave out the function name, you have created an anonymous function. It's not named, it can't be referred to anywhere else, but it's actually quite common if you take a look through existing JavaScript code. This is used quite frequently by people because it's not always necessary to name a function. Sometimes you just throw one in. That's where this comes in. In addition to the click action, there's also double click, mouse leave, mouse enter, hover, etc. Again, the point here is to make it slightly easier than doing everything directly using vanilla JavaScript. Is this making sense so far? So far, so good? So let's talk about one more event, then I promise we'll do some examples. Document.ready. This is a special event which executes when the HTML document is finished loading. Now, you may remember from last class, or last week, we had some bugs where we were trying to perform changes on an HTML document before that document was fully loaded. We were trying to manipulate elements that were not yet on the page. Thus, these operations failed. Every time. So, document.ready, and then you put code in there, waits until the page is fully loaded to execute the JavaScript. Because you're waiting for the page to be fully loaded, everything works. all of your elements are loaded, you can grab references to them without getting a bunch of null references and interfering with things. And this allows us to put the script in the header where it belongs and not at the footer, which has been our way of getting around this issue until now. Now that we know how to do this, we can put things in the proper place. So let's see some examples, shall we? Let's make a new page, index.html. There we go. Let me kill the lights. Shebang. JQuery examples. So, in order to, do anything useful, we need a little bit of website content first. So, list of famous people. Who is a famous person?
Nowadays?
Or, in general.
There are so many.
Pick one. What?
Like them too.
Anybody? I need some website content.
Albert Einstein.
Albert Einstein. There we go. That's spelled correctly. Who else you got? This is like the class participation part. If you want, I can fill this list with famous scientists. Yeah. Isaac Newton. Do you know Galileo's first name? I don't know. Copernicus. Gregor Mendel. One more scientist. Oh yeah. Mary Curie. Gotta have at least one glow in the dark entry, right? Ha ha ha. She poisoned herself with radio. And
Medicine.
yeah, something for medicine. Louis Pasteur. Probably misspelling these, but there you go. Ta-da! List of famous science people. And Alan Turing gets an honorable mention, even though he was a mathematician. So, reveal in File Explorer, open her up. There we go. List of famous science people. Ta-da! Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to get the jQuery library and embed it. There we go. Ooh, spin. Nice. That's a CSS animation right there. So, if you go to jQuery.com, you will see download jQuery version 3.7.1. There you go.
Should we do that?
We should do that. That is the thing we are going to do. Download. So, download the compressed production jQuery 3.7.1. There we go. No, don't do slim build, just compress. So you may see this and you'd be like, oh my goodness. This is like programming code with all the spaces taken out, basically. So basically, if you hit save, Control S, save, you can pop that thing into your directory here. Yep. Save. There we go. So if you take a look in the directory, you now have jQuery 3.7.1 min, and you can see that's .min.js, right? Now, here's an interesting little factoid. Why do you suppose they did this? Yeah, why is it encoded like this? Why are there no spaces? Anybody have any idea? Well, yeah. Well, the semicolon allows you to do this, right? Because it's a line separator. So that's why you don't need new lines. But like, why do this? Why smush it all together? Why compress it like this? Any idea?
So nobody can play with it, or maybe like.
Oh, it's if you know a little bit of programming, it's actually super easy to decompress this. You just like insert a new line everywhere there's a semicolon, and like you can automatically add the tabs as well. No, the original source code is fully reconstructible from this. Yes?
Make the file size.
Say again?
Make the file size.
Precisely so. You want minimize the file size, therefore you minimize the amount of bandwidth it takes to transfer it over the internet. Right? So by making it small like this, it actually takes it's more efficient in internet terms to do it this way. And I can tell you, that's not the only sorts of compression going on here. right? They have minimized it not only by removing white space, but of course it would be ridiculous to try to go into all the ways this has been compressed. I just thought that's like a this is how the internet works kind of point. So we now wish to include the source code file. Script source is equal to, what did we call it? JQuery, there it is. jQuery-3.7.1.in.js. You know that you're a programmer when, like, there is a difference to you between dots and points. It's like 3.7.1, those are different, even though they're the same character, from, like, you know, .js. Point and dot are different. Anyway, so we now have the jQuery library loaded. What we now do, write our own script. And let's put it in the head where it belongs. Script source is jQuery example.js. Control click, create file, bing bang boom. Now, let's start off with this document.ready. Let's just get it to give us a hello world for the time being. Document.ready. Function. There we go. So where it says the ... here, the intention is that you like press enter and write programming code in there. So for example, console.log hello world. Going to our console. Reload the page. Dun da 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 dun. Hello world. Now, you know, having a hello world display is not, you know, not that interesting. Let me show you that this is actually occurring after the whole page has been loaded. So, before the whole page has been loaded, if we try to grab a reference to this list of famous science people, it doesn't exist yet. It hasn't been loaded by the DOM, so if we try to, we should get a null reference. So, console.log document.query. I know I'm using query selector, and we should be talking jQuery. Just give me a moment here. UL. There we go. There we go. So you can see, when we grab the UL element, unordered list, on line 1, our result is null. The thing does not exist, therefore no reference was grabbed. However, when we execute that on line 5, the ready action waits until the document is ready. Therefore, when we try to grab the reference actually exists. Does this make sense?
I'm sorry, would you explain it again?
Sure, absolutely. Let's go into a little more detail. So, let's go in order of the things that are loaded into the web page. So, an HTML page loads one line at a time, right? So the first thing to load is doc-type HTML, then HTML language is English, head element start, meta, 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 title, then the next thing which is loaded is our jQuery library. So it's important that this occur before that, right? Our JavaScript is dependent on jQuery. It requires jQuery being loaded. Basically, if you flip them, we should get a bunch of errors. Yeah, there you go. If you load the library after you use it, it won't know what to do with the code you've written. So, this is making sense, right? Everything is done in linear order. So we load jQuery, which means the browser stops what it's doing and just loads that JavaScript while doing nothing else, right? Once it's finished, it moves to the next line and loads this JavaScript. Now, these elements have not been loaded, right? At the point that this JavaScript is executing, none of this exists yet, right? So, in our JavaScript, we have a line here, which grabs a reference to an unordered list element, right? This executes immediately, like the JavaScript code here is executed as it's encountered. So, line 1 executes as the first thing that's done when the HTML is on line 9. None of this has been loaded yet. Therefore, this is a reference to nothing currently. If it's not loaded, it can't be referenced. So, that's why that command on line 1 goes nowhere and does nothing. It has nothing to work on yet. Now, on line 3, we are doing something slightly different. We are setting an action. We are setting an event. The event that we are setting is wait until you reach the bottom of the document, then execute this. That's what document.ready is doing. Does that make sense? So because it's waiting until the entire file has been parsed and loaded, the same operation which resulted in failure the first time correctly selects the element we want because it has now been loaded. It's been loaded into the browser. Does this make sense? This is kind of a key point. You can avoid a lot of headaches by understanding this. Because if you don't understand this, and you think that if you can't understand, if you're like racking your brain trying to understand why line 1 doesn't work for you, you know, it's because you're trying to load it too early, and you can spend many hours down. You can throw many hours down the toilet on errors like that, which I'm sure all of you have at various points over the semesters.
So the document that you're referring is basically the body of
Yeah, the document means the page.
The page.
Yes.
So basically we're, in the first example, without the first line, we were asking them to console the hello world after the page was loaded, right?
Yes.
And the second example, we are basically saying do not load the page, execute the hello world. But because the hello world comes after the page, so it was not executed on the first line, it was only in the fifth line. Right?
Run that by me again.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So in the first example, without that console.log document.query selector, without that, we were basically loading the page first and then executing the hello world at that time, right?
That's what the purpose of .ready is, yeah.
Yes.
It tells it, execute this after the page is loaded. Yes.
And then when we added the document.query, we were saying that do not load the page, first execute the hello world. But our our code was saying load it after the page was.
Yes, yes. So I would adjust the grammar.
Yeah,
very slightly.
English is not my first language, so
Yeah.
it's kind of like, I might not be able to explain it properly, but.
No, it is nevertheless important to be precise.
Yeah.
It's not that this is, like line 1 is telling it not to load the page. It's just saying do this first.
Yeah, do this first and
Yeah.
then load the page, so it's
Yeah.
kind of
Like there are things you can do to make it stop, right? You can kill the process, but that's not what we're trying to do here.
Okay.
Yeah, so another interesting thing to note, it doesn't actually matter what order I put these in. I get the exact same result, right? It doesn't matter if I say set this to run at the end, set this to run when the document is loaded, and then try to get this reference too soon. Or, the order in which I tell it to do those two things doesn't matter. We get the same result in both cases. So, to extend your previous example, lines 1 through 4 set up the event only, right? They set up an event, and then when that event occurs, that code gets executed. So it doesn't matter if you set up the event first and ask for this element improperly second, or reverse the order. This is the only thing right now that's printing anything at all, right? These are only printing things in the future. This is the future, this is the present. Does that make sense? So, good. So, let's now add a little bit more JQuery. So, you'll see, when we grab a reference with JQuery, we are not necessarily grabbing the DOM element itself. We are generating a JQuery object which sort of wraps that DOM element. So, to obtain an attribute using JQuery, be attribute action. So if we, it'll need an attribute now. Let's say style. Style is a little bit. Let's add an image. An image would be nice. Image of Einstein. Let's see here. That's a pretty famous one. Let's grab that. Just view the web page. Oh, way too big. Width equals 100 pixels. There we go. Much better. So, if we want to access attributes in the same way that we do using standard vanilla DOM manipulation, image, source. See, the string Einstein.jpg is accessible using the getAttribute function. Does this make sense? So the equivalent, so this is JQuery, the equivalent vanilla operation, the console.log document.query selector image dot source. There you go. And you can see that that's a bit like, that's a bit more. That's like the absolute, that's the absolute file position rather than the relative file position. But those are the same operation. Does this make sense so far?
Is it okay without semicolon and last one?
Oh, yeah. Technically in JavaScript, semicolons are optional. But, yeah. Still preferred. Does this make sense?
Yeah. Professor, if we don't put the semicolon, you will deduct marks or no?
Oh, no, not at all. It's a stylistic thing, not a, okay. If you want some stylistic points that tempt me sorely to take marks off, inconsistent spacing for your tabbing over for code blocks, that bothers me. If you get that, you know, like technically speaking, there are some people who write JavaScript intentionally never writing any semicolons because they feel it should be Python, and Python doesn't have any semicolons. So it's optional, so that means it is optional. Does that make sense? So let's see if we can't do something relatively simple, like change this image to be a different image when we click on it. Does that make sense? So far, so good? Is anybody lost? Anybody not getting anything? Is this okay? If anybody has any questions, you know, now would be the time. So, let's say we want to add a click event to the image. So we select the image, dot, click, then to this we give a function. Now you can give a function in the regular sense, or you can give an anonymous function. In a situation like this, it would be very common to use an anonymous function, but since we have an example of that with the ready, let's do it the other way just for completeness. So we write a function, click handler, and into this we place the click handler. So with this, we do image, if image dot attribute source is equal to Einstein.jpg. We do something else, we do something else. Basically, I want to set up a quick toggle, you know, be able to toggle back and forth. So that's Albert Einstein. How about somebody from the age of photography? Nah, let's do Isaac Newton. Sure. Quite a stern-looking fellow. There we go. Showing off his double chin. So, if the image is Einstein, we wish to flip it to Newton and vice versa. Just give me 1 second, I'm forgetting the exact syntax. Oh, okay. So when the attribute tag is called with one argument, that argument is the attribute we wish to change. If we supply 2 arguments, that goes from a get operation to a set operation. So we are setting the value of that attribute. So image dot attribute source gets Newton dot what was it? JPEG. Otherwise, image dot attribute source gets you Einstein. So, let us first verify that this works. Click. Alright. That's console.log. Oh, yeah, okay. Those have to be, those are strings. That won't help. Take a look and see what I'm doing wrong. Shouldn't have to be an ID. I'll give it an ID. Oh. Okay. I understand where I made my error, and it's hilarious because it's exactly the same one that I warned all of you against making. Okay, so what did I do wrong? It's this line. That's the error. Anybody know why? It's literally the exact same thing. Image doesn't exist yet, right? So if I pop that in here, execute that after, JavaScript is such a pain. we are getting our console, which is working. Let's just print that, just to make sure that I'm printing what I think I am. I'm performing string comparison here, right? Ah, there it is. Found it. Spelling error gets me every time. There we go. So, again, just to demonstrate jQuery's effectiveness over vanilla JavaScript, let's do a vanilla JavaScript implementation of this, just to, just the function though. We won't worry about won't worry about setting up the event. Although, maybe I will do that too. So, function vanilla. We would do something like variable image is equal to document.query selector image if image dot source is equal to Einstein dot JPEG. Image dot source is equal to Newton dot JPEG. Otherwise, image dot source is equal to This actually doesn't really sell me on jQuery very much.
Yeah, I think that the vanilla JavaScript is much better and easier than, right?
Well, a lot is made compact by simply setting the variable, If I did not set the variable, which is, like, technically I modified the code. If I wanted exactly equivalent code, I would have to do this. Right? But nobody does that. So yeah, two ways of saying the same thing, basically. So some jQuery actions, additionally. Let's take a look at some additional things. If you wish to set the text content of a selected element, you have a text action. If you want to set HTML content, you have HTML. If you wish to set the value of a text input or something like some input form. Remember, for a text box, the content of the text box is value, not like inner HTML. You have .val. So, for example, list item dot text. Just about did it again. Let's put it up here, actually. Text is several different weasels. And here, let's set HTML to one large weasel. So, for that type of operation, it is better. The vanilla equivalent here would be var list items is equal to documents dot query selector all list item for let I equals 0, I is less than list items dot length I plus plus list items at I dot inner HTML is equal to this phrase here. So you can see, in that kind of a case, it does make it easier, right? It really shines when you're selecting multiple things. Does that make sense? For like, no, it doesn't? Okay. Well, let's go through the code. So, under JQuery, we select all list items, right? All of these guys. Yes. .html changes to one large weasel, right? In vanilla, the same operation is this. Number one, document.query selector all list items. So we grab an array which is filled with references to list items, right? We save that array here, right? Now we have to loop over them. I'm using for loop syntax, but you know, you can use, like, there are different ways of doing it, but this is one way of doing it. For let I equals 0, I is less than list items dot length I plus plus. Construction we're very much familiar with by now. List item at I dot inner HTML is equal to one large weasel in heading 3. So where this thing automatically keeps track of the fact that this operation returns multiple references and loops over all of them, if we were to do that in vanilla JavaScript, we would be just writing normal code to perform that operation, which, you know, it's not difficult work, but it's tedious and prone to error, as all human beings are. So this is easier than that. Does that make sense? These two do the same thing. Yeah? Still having difficulty? Anybody having difficulty with this? Shall we move on then? 1 second? Still considering it? Okay. I'll give you some time to consider it then. Have you guys been able to get these examples working? No? Okay.
Mine is not.
Perhaps we should start there then.
I did not do the one that you just it's not working. Mine is looking like this. It's lazy. You can have mine, I will stack it.
Oh,
Thank you. Just, sorry, I'm on the camera.
what's with this CR download? Yeah. So, let's first see if this is even doing anything. This needs quotes. So if you don't include quotes, it'll think it's a variable name,
Oh,
which is why it was highlighting it in blue.
okay. It shows two pictures for me.
Well, that, yeah.
Because of one is in the meta and one is in.
Well, yeah, because you got it twice. You put 2 images in, so you got 2 images.
Oh,
So,
just delete one and compare. Okay, perfect.
there you go.
Thank you.
No trouble. Have you, you need a hand with anything? Did you get it working? Yeah, that's because it's a heading preview. Yeah, I was doing that to indicate that it's like, that's HTML, including HTML tags. Whereas text is just text. The strong tag is the same thing as bold. Oh, this will be overwriting it. So, to demonstrate the difference, right? Strong means bold. So, one large weasel, large is bolded, right? I've put the same tags here in text. If I click again, you'll see that it actually inserts the tags as text into it rather than performing the HTML operation. several strong, different, and strong pieces. Does that make sense? Would you like me to take a look?
Yes.
Yeah, let's see here. Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
So wait, why is
Because it's a heading.
Oh. Right.
Yeah. It's doing the formatting correctly. By the way, your shortcut for like Windows back and forth is hold the super key and use the arrows. And that's like, you don't have to fiddle with it manually. It's handy. There you go. Did you get it working?
Just trying to get the full here. Sorry about that.
Of course. Please take your time. So, So, in addition to direct manipulation, you can also do CSS operations. However, given that it's 11 o'clock, we might have our break at the moment. I think that's probably correct. So, let's take a 20-minute break. When we return, we will continue with the CSS stuff and also talk about Bootstrap, which we've talked about a little bit already, but there are some additional examples in there. Make sense? All good? Cool. All right.
I think mine is working now.
Perfect. All right, 20-minute break. And we're back. All right. So, resuming our conversation about jQuery, unfortunately, the break was a little bit longer than I anticipated, so we're going to have to move through the material a little more quickly. But we do need to cover the material, so here we go. Many of our jQuery actions do things to the DOM like manipulating text, adding values, manipulating attributes. Some of the attributes that you want to modify frequently are style attributes. So there is a whole set of CSS related actions that you can take with jQuery. The basic one as you might expect, is just CSS. So CSS, it applies a styling property to an element. Now, this syntax is a bit different from how we encode it in HTML. You may notice some curly braces in there. Does anybody remember from last week what this is? When you've got the curly braces and the colons and the commas? Starts with an O and a B.
Object oriented? No, object.
Just an object, yeah, that's an object. So what it is key value pairs. These are CSS properties and their associated values. Notice that we are using the CSS names proper here, not the JavaScript versions where the hyphen would be removed and you'd have a capital C, right? So, if we want to do something like that in our example, quite easily done. Let's say paragraph dot CSS color is red. There we go. Pulling up our, where is it here? There we go. There we go. Pulling up our page. Come on. Oh, yeah, there aren't actually any paragraphs. They're all list items. I made a HTML page with no paragraphs. Hilarious. All right. There you go. All red. One line. Very quick, very easy. Now, the question is that as easy as the corresponding CSS rule? No. Right? Like, the better way, if you're going to do something like that, the better way to do it is either in a style block, right? Or something else. List item, color, red. Right? That's much easier. But the trick with JavaScript is, of course, you can do this dynamically according to running programs and running functions. Right? It's useless to use JavaScript to modify a bunch of these static properties, right? The whole point of JavaScript is doing things in response to events. So, if you wanted to be able to add an entire CSS rule, just like that, triggered by an event, this is the way to do it. Save, reload, save. Sometimes it caches it, so you have to like reload from the File Explorer. Really? Still red? Where did I even put that? Oh yeah, it's here. I forgot, sorry. So, they're black, now they're red. And they stay red forever, because there's nothing unsetting that property. Does that make sense? So, style, CSS styles can be added dynamically. Another thing that you can do, so the whole point of classes, most people, when they're sort of getting into it for the first time, they kind of imagine the class as, oh, I have a bunch of elements in my HTML page, and I apply a class to all of them, and then I write the CSS for that class. really, classes work better in the reverse. You think about a set of style properties you'd like to apply, maybe even dynamically. You write that, and then you put it in the HTML pieces that apply to it. For example, if I write a style for a particular class, let's call it ordered. Border is 2 pixels solid black, something like that, right? Just a quick little one. You'll notice nothing in the HTML page currently references that class, right? So, what you can do is you can add that class dynamically using jQuery and JavaScript more generally. So, for example, perhaps for my image, I wish to add class ordered. If I got the syntax right, you can see it adds a border when I click on it. Further, we can remove things from classes. The same way. So now Newton is bordered, but Einstein is not. So this operation, where we are flipping between two states, this is commonly called a toggle, right? Like a toggle switch. So there is actually there's one specifically for our case called toggle class. So you don't have to remember where you added and where you removed it. You can just say toggle, toggle, and then it just flips between the on and the off state whenever it hits toggle class. Does that make sense? You could do this, you could do something with this like, if you wanted to add a little bit of animation, you could say, is this a heading 1? I think it's a heading 1. Yep, heading 1. Set interval every, let me see the set interval handler timeout. Okay. Function, anonymous function, and then timeout is 500. Grab a reference to H1. Dot toggle class ordered. There we go. There you can see it's toggling the class every half second. Which is kind of cool, right? That's like, you could see that being useful, right? Maybe? It's certainly annoying. Annoying things are occasionally useful, if it's your purpose to annoy someone.
Maybe make an alert or something.
Oof. Yeah. Set interval and alert boxes is like, that is like the true face of chaos. Okay, cool. So, the other thing that you can do, so far, I have been, every time I need a particular element referenced, I write a new line for it. You don't have to do it that way. You can also use what's called chaining actions. So if I'm making a bunch of modifications to to the same element, I can chain those things together. Like so. You can see that if I restart, nothing has been modified in terms of functionality. Right? So, it is the opinion of Dr. Brown, who wrote these slides, that the fact you can do this and reduce the line count and like cram more on a line using jQuery is probably why it's still popular. Programmers, like people who program heavily for a living, love this kind of stuff because it saves them keystrokes. Programmers are all about saving keystrokes. So, does that make sense? You can chain actions together?
I have a question.
Sure.
Why two of these have same color, red?
Because I've never unset it. Right? In this side of the if statement, I set it red. On this side, I'm not changing that style attribute. If I wanted to, I could certainly do so.
Which means it's not the full button to black, and then
Right.
automatically.
If you want it back to black, you have to set it back to black.
Oh, so if you use that, it's gonna be basically permanently change the color.
Every one of these is a permanent change to something on the page.
Oh.
Yeah, that's I'm glad you brought this point up, because that is the correct way to think about JavaScript. The data it's operating on is the page, right? When you modify something like this property, it's not like modifying a variable in a programming language. You are modifying a property on this page. If you expect it to change, it won't do so unless you tell it to explicitly. Make sense?
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent.
Just one more question. So
Yes.
once we save the script or the code, when we load it, initially it's going to be black, but when we start executing those code, it's going to permanently change everything, right?
As you can see,
Yeah, it's black, then it's going to turn to red, and then it's going to turn to blue.
yep, trigger the event once,
Yeah.
trigger the event twice, toggle, 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 toggle. Just like so.
Yeah, perfect.
Like, if you want, you could do something like here. Okay. Watch this. Set timeout to set it back to black. After, I'm gonna need to put that in a function. Function. That's got to go in a function. Oh, like that. After, say, 1 second. Put that there. Put that here.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah. got
So
it.
it is resetting, but only because I'm telling it to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad we managed to squeeze in this little review of set interval and set timeout, because those are also really important functions for dynamic interactive coding. Now here's the thing. Right? Each one of these timeouts that I set up is an independent timeout. So basically, in terms of timeline, right? How it's currently working, I set it blue, then it sets back to black. Then, at some point, I set it blue, it sets back to black, right? I then, at some point, I'm setting it red, and it sets back to black after 1 second, right? If I go to another scenario where I set it to blue, and it sets back to black after 1 second, and then I set it to red before that timeout expires, right? It sets another 1 second timeout. So, right, if I had set it back to blue here, it will be reset to black here, not at its timeout. So if we sort of, if we view the, like, if I'm going to do like, this is what the page looks like, right? It's blue, then it's black, then it's red, then it's black, right? In this one, what you get is blue, red, black, blue, black, forward. So you get kind of weird behaviors when these, if you don't wait for the timeout before setting a new one. Technically, what we should have done is this guy knows to cancel that one. And it is possible to set those up, but you know, there's only so much time. Right? If you set this one to cancel that one, then you get your expected duration of blue. But without that cancellation, it's going to be a really short blue cycle. I can probably produce this if I let the time out a little bit, but I don't know. This is kind of a subtle point. I think we need to move on. So, JQuery also supports plugins. Have you guys like encountered the term plugin in terms of like code? Yeah, not really. Okay, so you know how browsers have browser extensions? You know? Well, the idea of a plugin is similar in a programming language. A plugin is basically just some additional library or some additional functionality that's not necessarily made by the jQuery people. You might have people like, it's like, oh, we would like a library that does this for jQuery. They talk to jQuery guys and they're like, hey, would you mind putting this into your thing? And they're like, no way, man, we don't have time for that. So then they're like, well, we're just gonna make it ourselves then. And they do, and then they release it, and it becomes a plugin, right? Something optional that you can add into jQuery or any other sort of software system, normally not authored by the same people who author the base system. You can also think of it as an expansion pack. jQuery plugins exist for common things such as calendars, menu, and animation, but you can also do really advanced stuff with it, like facial recognition. So, yeah. Lots of plugins available. The possibilities are endless. And, okay, let's write some jQuery code. We've kind of already done that. So, any questions about jQuery? I realize we're moving through it fast. We'll have more time to sort of let the topic percolate, and we'll come back to it on Friday. Yeah. So let's talk about Bootstrap. So fortunately, I was kind of ahead of the slides a little bit in in talking about Bootstrap. It turned out to be advantageous, just the way that today has gone. So, Bootstrap. Bootstrap is another front-end web development framework. Similar to JQuery, the idea is to beef up, to add to make less difficult web development. Bootstrap was developed at Twitter, back when it was known as Twitter, to encourage consistency across internal tools. It was publicly released in 2011, updated consistently since then. Bootstrap has a very active community. It's generally, it's like one of those things where you want a really strong, active community because they're constantly contributing to the code base. But anyway, it is the second most starred project on GitHub, so very popular with web developers. Do you guys know what GitHub is? Ooh! Oh! Ooh, okay. You need to check to see on your VM to see if it has Git installed. Git, G-I-T, see if it has it installed. We can talk about it after class. That might be another way, and a much, much better way than the way that I was talking about earlier. Anyway, so GitHub is basically a website with lots and lots and lots and lots of code. GitHub.com. I'll just show you mine. I won't be able to actually because it's requiring two-factor authentication. I don't have my phone on me because it needs to be charged. Okay, fine. I'll show you GitHub another time. It's cool. GitHub is fantastic and beautiful and lovely. So. Basically, this issue of like transferring code between different computers and how that is apparently fraught with peril. Well, we have tools that solve this problem. One of those tools is Git. Git was written by the same person who wrote the Linux kernel, Linus Torvalds. Did you know that he actually named Linux after himself? Did I tell you guys that?
No.
Yeah. Linux is actually Linus Unix. Linus Torvalds wrote it. He also wrote Git, which is extremely useful software as well. So, examples. Bootstrap includes several predefined button styles, each serving their own semantic purpose, with a few extras thrown in for more control. So, the idea with Bootstrap, when you select a color for a button, you are not selecting a color. You are selecting a purpose, and a color is provided for that purpose. So, for example, if you are trying to indicate a success message using Bootstrap, you have the success color. If you are indicating an error or a warning, you have error and warning colors. If you're providing something informationally, there is an info color, all of these things. Does this make sense? So, in code, the way that it works, you include multiple Bootstrap classes in order to style the button accordingly. So the button class says this is a button, style it as a Bootstrap button. Button primary, button success, button info, these all select different button purposes which correspond to colors. Does this make sense?
So basically it says that success is green and danger is red.
Yes.
So it automatically basically choose the color, like, automatically?
Yes.
We didn't assign it to the Bootstrap automatically assigned it.
Precisely. And if you, it does more than just do the background color. If you'll note, it has intelligently selected where you want dark background and white text and light background dark text. So, if you were to do this in CSS, you would need to decide what specific color you wanted there, and whether, toggle text color between white and black, depending. You'd have to you'd have to test it, squint at it, see if you can read it with the current things, try the other one. All of that work has been taken out of the equation. All you have to do is use these very reliable color schemes, basically. The problem that this solves is the problem of infinite choice, right? Like when you are looking at a color palette and trying to decide what something should look like, it's like you have literally every color available to you, right? Bootstrap has made certain pre-baked decisions. They're just the people who oversee how Bootstrap deploys are experts in user interface design and that sort of thing. So these are, basically Bootstrap is embodying a great deal of what is currently considered the best practices in user interface design. And all you have to do is just add these. It's very cool. Does that make sense? It is possible to make a very good-looking website without writing a single custom CSS rule using Bootstrap. Since, once we introduce Bootstrap, we kind of talk about our own CSS rules as custom CSS rules. So what Bootstrap essentially is, it's a predefined list of CSS classes. Your responsibility is applying the right class to the right element at the right time in the right place. There are also a set of predefined components that provide some specific functionality. We have previously done the carousel example in class. That's an example of one of these. Other ones include drop-down lists, navigation bars, pagination, etc. Scrolls by, toasts, and all of that kind of fun stuff. These additional, these souped-up page elements are JavaScript enabled. They require JavaScript in order to be used. So when you are including links to include your Bootstrap via the CDN, you gotta grab both the CSS rules and the JavaScript to have carousel and related things. Does this make sense so far? Extensive example code and tutorials make it easy to integrate into our own applications. In many cases, all you have to do is go to W3 Schools, copy, paste the template code, modify it as you need it, and boom. That's all that it needs. That's all that needs to be done. So, why might we use front-end frameworks? I'm so glad you asked. Slide. So, front-end frameworks reduce development time. They leverage existing work. You don't have to redevelop things from scratch all the time, which is a thing that software people do quite frequently. Leveraging existing work is extremely important in the web devs space. Now, there is a bit of a cultural difference between you folks and developers in the quote-unquote real world, right? Here, we are trying to teach you how to program, right? That is like, the purpose here is that you folks acquire the skills you need in order to be able to function in this space, right? That means you need to know how code works from scratch, right? There's a certain class of things that you just won't know unless you've built things up from bare basics, right? This is why we do things like study how sorting algorithms work, right? It's an important intellectual exercise. That said, once you get out into the real world, a company is not willing to pay you to reinvent a sorting algorithm. Not when good existing solutions exist, right? So, once you get out into the real world, register trademark, you will be relying on other people's code as much as you can, probably. The less you code yourself, the more you leave to reliable libraries, the faster you can get your work done, the more money your company makes, right? I have a whole diatribe, a whole speech about like time to market and how that's like one of the most important factors for technology companies is getting your product to market before your competition type thing, which means that like if development is lagging behind, that is actually costing your company money and may do so in such to such a degree that you may find yourself looking for work because the company goes because it couldn't get any products out, right? Not all companies are Nintendo, right? Nintendo has such a just rabidly loyal base of fans that it doesn't matter how long Nintendo makes them wait for the next Zelda game, that game will sell like gangbusters once it's released. Most companies don't operate like that. Most companies, you actually have to compete with your competition. Another important aspect is cross-compatibility. There are lots of different browsers, there are lots of different platforms. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about flexboxes and containers and that sort of thing. Laptops, desktops, tablets, and phones will all have different screen resolutions. Desktops sometimes have just really stupidly large screen resolutions. How can a small development team possibly test across all of these possible combinations? Not easily, unless of course you're using the latest version of these plugins, which all of that is also baked right in. Make sense? So far so good? If you need me to go over any of this again next class, I'd be happy to do so. So, another advantage of using front-end frameworks and this sort of thing, which is not listed, is these libraries tend to have accessibility concerns addressed, like sort of in the basis of the code. They address accessibility concerns that you may not be aware of or may not think about. So if you use these types of libraries, things like screen readers tend to work a bit better, that sort of thing. Actually, that's also one of the reasons that you want to like program your HTML properly and leave all the closing tags and validate your HTML that there are no errors with it, because the thing that is reading the HTML might not be a browser, right? One of the things that reads HTML is a text-to-speech engine for the visually impaired, right? So if you've got janky HTML that's like just going everywhere, nothing's closed properly. The automatic tool that a visually impaired person is using to read your website is much more likely to fail because your code doesn't look good, right? And, you know, we all know that when machines are reading code, they expect that code to be rigorously written, right? So that's another reason for all of this is accessibility concerns also are a concern. Does that make sense? And I think with you guys in your particular space in digital health, that should be a more like front of mind concern for you folks, I would say, you know? So that's kind of like the whole point of the degree, isn't it, in some respect? You know? I do actually think the degree has value. I think it should have its name changed. So the design advantages. So there is a big advantage to using a library that's used by lots of other people, right? Number one, it's kept up to date. Number two, if there are problems, you're likely not the first person to encounter them. Number three, when problems are encountered and not solved, things like Stack Overflow tend to be like heavily helpful. You guys know about Stack Overflow, I hope. Did you just shake your head?
I was just.
Hey, something else? Okay. If you don't know what Stack Overflow is, Stack Overflow is where you post a question about coding, and somebody who knows what they are talking about posts the answer.
Oh.
So you too can post questions to Stack Overflow. Response times are fast. Okay. Do you want to know why it is that ChatGPT can code reasonably well? Number one, it's pulling GitHub, right? Basically everything public on GitHub is fed into ChatGPT's database. All that code, right? That's how it knows how to code. That and other places. And the way it knows how to answer programming questions is because it pulls the information out of Stack Overflow. So this is the internet's #1 site if you have programming questions about anything. Make sense? It works a little bit like Reddit, where like you can upvote and downvote responses to questions, and people who know what they're talking about upvote and downvote. So, you know. Anyway, I'm afraid that's all the time I have for you today. We shall resume our discussion of Bootstrap and JQuery at our earliest opportunity. Thank you and good evening.